Have you ever wondered what happened to the 12 apostles of Jesus after he ascended into heaven? Most people know the stories of faith and miracles, but few are aware of the dark and intense details of how these men ended their lives. Imagine dedicating your existence to spreading such a powerful message that the price to be paid is your own life. Shocking, isn't it? But that's exactly what happened. And the most impressive part, they did not back down. Each apostle faced their fate in unimaginable ways: crucifixions, beheadings, brutal tortures, all for one reason: their unwavering faith in Christ. If you think their sacrifice was just a distant choice of the past, wait until you understand what truly motivated these men to face such horrific deaths. The answer may surprise you, so let's get to it. Peter, the most prominent of the apostles, carried a humility that transcended his actions throughout his life. When Emperor Nero ordered his execution, Peter, without hesitation, requested to be crucified upside down, claiming he was not worthy to die in the same way as Jesus. This unusual request, besides reflecting his deep devotion, shows us that even in the most difficult moments, true humility is an unshakable power. In today's world, Peter's humility can serve as a practical example for our lives. Think about the small, everyday situations. Instead of seeking recognition or approval, as often happens, why not take inspiration from Peter and act with simplicity, doing what is right without expecting anything in return? In our work environment or personal relationships, this attitude can transform how we are seen and how we see the world. Reading the Bible and reflecting on the stories of the apostles can help keep this perspective alive in our hearts. Peter also leaves us with a clear message of perseverance. Even in the face of death, he remained faithful to his principles. And this leads us to think, how can we stay true to what we believe in, even in the most difficult situations? This reflection paves the way for other impressive stories about the apostles who walked alongside him. Andrew, Peter's brother, also lived a life marked by unwavering devotion. He met his final fate on an X-shaped cross in Greece. The cross was chosen as a form of torture, but even while hanging there, he preached the gospel for 2 days until his death. Andrew shows us that even in the face of extreme suffering, the mission to spread the word was more important than any physical pain. What can we learn from Andrew's story? In our lives, we face moments of great difficulty, where it seems like everything is against us. However, just as Andrew stood firm in his faith, we can draw inspiration from him to stay focused on what we believe is important. Imagine someone facing challenges at work or in a personal project. Instead of giving up at the first sign of pain or discomfort, why not continue preaching your message, just as Andrew did? Reading the Bible is always a source of comfort in such times. There is something fascinating about how Andrew handled his last days, something that leads us to reflect. How can we continue to spread our own message, even when the circumstances seem challenging? And this takes us to other stories of apostles who also did not hesitate to sacrifice their lives in the name of their faith. James the Greater was the first of the apostles to be martyred, marking the beginning of a wave of Christian persecution. Under Herod's orders, he was beheaded, becoming a powerful symbol of sacrifice and courage. The Bible highlights his readiness to follow Christ's path to the end, and his death makes us reflect on the importance of embracing our values, even when it means facing severe consequences. James did not hesitate to do what he believed was right, even if it meant losing his own life. Today, we are rarely called to make such great sacrifices, but James' story can be applied in smaller, but yet equally significant ways. Think about situations where we are challenged to defend our principles, whether in a difficult argument or when pressured to act against our ethics. James teaches us that sometimes the hardest path is the right one, and that maintaining our integrity can have a profound impact. Everyday examples, like making an ethical decision at work or standing up for someone treated unfairly, echo the kind of courage James demonstrated. This story prepares us to reflect on how the apostles continued to spread the gospel, each facing their own fate with firmness. And the next story about John brings a different perspective, where surprisingly, death did not reach him in the same way. John, the apostle closest to Jesus, lived a unique path among the other apostles. He is the only one who did not suffer martyrdom despite the attempts of his enemies. On one occasion, John was thrown into boiling oil but miraculously survived. After that event, he was exiled to the island of Patmos, where, far from the chaos, he wrote the book of Revelation. His story teaches us that even when challenges seem insurmountable, there is always a greater force that can protect us. Many may see John's story as a sign that sometimes we are spared from the worst adversities to fulfill a greater mission. And this is something we can apply to our lives. Imagine going through a difficult time, but surviving the storm with a renewed sense of purpose. Just as John used his time in exile to write, we too can turn our periods of solitude or difficulty into productive moments. Reflecting on the scriptures, as John did, is an excellent way to find strength in the most unexpected moments. John makes us think about how life can take us down unexpected paths, but always for a reason. While he didn't face death like his fellow apostles, his journey was equally challenging and prepares us for even more painful stories, like that of Bartholomew, who met a terrible fate. Bartholomew, one of the most dedicated apostles, faced one of the most brutal deaths among the 12. He was skinned alive and then beheaded in Armenia because of his evangelical mission. His death is a terrifying testament to the price some of the early Christians paid to spread God's word. Despite his indescribable agony, Bartholomew did not renounce his faith, which makes us reflect on the true meaning of courage and commitment to the mission he carried until the end. It's hard to imagine such an extreme situation today, but Bartholomew's story inspires us to consider how we handle our own adversities. As difficult as the circumstances we face may be, such as work problems or personal challenges, they are rarely comparable to what Bartholomew endured. Even so, we can draw inspiration from his perseverance and strength. The Bible, throughout its texts, invites us to be strong in the face of challenges, reminding us that there is a greater force supporting us. Bartholomew's story naturally leads us to ask, how far are we willing to go for what we believe in? This brings us to the next apostle, Thomas, whose journey in India also brought great challenges and, in the end, martyrdom by the spear. Thomas, known for doubting Jesus' resurrection, transformed into one of the most fervent apostles after witnessing the truth. He took the gospel to India, where he dedicated his life to preaching Christ's message in a land full of cultural and religious challenges. The Bible recounts his courage in crossing these barriers, but in the end, he was martyred with a spear, a tragic symbol of his dedication. His journey is a powerful lesson about transformation through faith. In everyday life, Thomas's story can be applied in many ways. Sometimes, we are like Thomas in the beginning, full of doubts and fears about the path ahead of us. However, once we find our truth, as he found his, we can overcome any obstacle. Picking up a book on the lives of the apostles or studying the Bible more deeply can help us understand how to deal with these doubts and turn them into strength. Thomas teaches us that it is possible to move from disbelief to total commitment to what we believe in. His story makes us reflect on the depth of internal change that faith can cause in someone, a transformation that led him to martyrdom. But Thomas wasn't the only one who faced death bravely. Philip, another apostle, also met a fate marked by crucifixion, and his story will be explored next. Philip, an apostle who preached tirelessly throughout the ancient world, met his end in Asia Minor, where he was crucified. Unlike other apostles, Philip was not nailed, but tied to the cross, prolonging his agony. He continued to preach while tied, offering words of hope and faith to the people around him. His determination to keep sharing Jesus' message, even in his final moments, is a powerful lesson about perseverance. In practical life, Philip's example shows us that even in situations where we are limited or bound, whether by external circumstances like a crisis or a difficult situation, we can continue to preach what we believe in. The Bible reminds us that there is always a way to contribute, even when conditions seem impossible. Imagine someone in a toxic work environment. It's still possible to maintain integrity and spread positive values, just as Philip did in his final moments. Philip's death teaches us that even when everything seems lost, we can still make a difference until the last second. His journey also reminds us of the strength of other apostles, like James the Lesser, who faced his own brutal martyrdom. And that's the story that now unfolds before us. James the Lesser, also known as the son of Alphaeus, followed his path preaching Christ's word to the far reaches of Egypt. He was a quiet apostle, but his dedication to the Christian mission was unwavering. Unfortunately, his faith led him to a tragic end as he was stoned to death. His courage in the face of persecution, even knowing the fate that awaited him, reflects an inner strength that only deep faith can provide. James teaches us that greatness doesn't come from titles or recognition, but from the consistency of doing good and spreading the message, even without being in the spotlight. In our everyday lives, we often feel that only grand actions are important, but James reminds us that strength lies in every small action we take. Whether it's helping a friend in silence or being a positive influence in our community, we can deeply impact those around us. The Bible is filled with examples of people who achieved great things through small acts, and James is one of them. His tragic death makes us think about the sacrifices made by the apostles and the strength they drew from their faith to endure so much. James's fate opens the door to the next story, where Jude Thaddeus, another apostle, faced death with equally impressive devotion. Jude Thaddeus, also known as the Apostle of the Desperate, dedicated his life to preaching in difficult regions like Persia. With unwavering faith, he converted many to Christianity, which eventually led to his death by an axe, a brutal death that mirrored the strength of his conviction. His story shows us how he didn't fear death but embraced his fate, knowing he was fulfilling a greater mission, something the apostles saw as the pinnacle of their spiritual journey. In today's world, we often find ourselves in desperate situations, not knowing how to act or which path to follow. Jude Thaddeus, known for interceding for the desperate, teaches us that maintaining faith and continuing on our journey, even when there seems to be no solution, is a way to find strength. In moments of anguish, we can draw inspiration from him through the Bible, turning to prayer and perhaps dedicating time to reflect on our own mission in this world. Just as he did. His story paves the way for the fate of another apostle, Simon the Zealot, who shared the challenging missions in Persia with Jude Thaddeus, but met an even more brutal and symbolic end, being sawn in half. Simon the Zealot was known for his fervent passion and unwavering dedication to Christ's mission. He traveled to Persia along with Jude Thaddeus, bringing the message of the gospel to hostile lands. There, he faced intense persecution, culminating in a horrific execution. He was sawn in half because of his faith. This brutal fate illustrates just how committed Simon was to the Christian cause, willing to sacrifice everything for what he believed in, even in the face of such inhuman death. In today's world, although we are rarely confronted with such violent fates, Simon's story makes us reflect on how far we are willing to go for our convictions. In moments of adversity, it's easy to give up or abandon our values, but Simon challenges us to maintain our integrity. He inspires us to continue our journey, even when the path seems full of obstacles. The Bible teaches us to find strength in these examples of unconditional dedication, a reminder that true faith sustains us in the darkest moments. Simon shares with the other apostles a legacy of faith and courage that transcends death itself. And as we look at his story, we see how intertwined these lives were, just like that of Matthias, the one chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, who also met a tragic but spiritually significant end. Matthias, chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, carries with him a story of redemption and commitment. He was selected by the apostles to fill the place left by Judas, and with that, took on the great responsibility of continuing the evangelical work. His preaching took him to various parts of the world, and eventually he met his death in Judea, being stoned and then beheaded for his faith. His life shows us that even when someone enters the mission late, there is still room to fulfill a grand purpose. Today, we can apply Matthias's example to our own lives in many ways. Often, we feel it's too late to start something new, or that opportunities have passed us by. Matthias reminds us that there is always a chance to make a difference, regardless of when we begin. Whether it's studying the Bible, seeking a new purpose, or even changing careers, what's important is to embrace the opportunity with the same devotion he demonstrated. The Bible teaches us to answer the call, even when it seems late or unexpected. And just as Matthias was chosen to fill a void, another apostle, Matthew, also transformed his life in an extraordinary way. His story from tax collector to fervent preacher is a profound example of transformation. And that's what we'll explore next. Matthew, once a tax collector, was transformed by Jesus' message and became one of the most dedicated apostles. He preached in several regions, including Persia and Ethiopia, spreading the gospel wherever he went. However, during the celebration of the Eucharist, Matthew was martyred by a soldier who stabbed him in the back, sent by a local ruler opposed to his preaching. Matthew's journey shows us that no matter someone's past, there is always room for deep transformation and for becoming a vessel of the divine message. Matthew's story makes us reflect on our own transformations. How often do we believe that our past defines our future? Matthew teaches us that just as he left behind his life as a tax collector, we too can abandon old habits and start over, no matter how far we are from our ideals. Dedicating time to studying the Bible or seeking new opportunities can help us walk this path of personal renewal. Matthew's death closes the circle of sacrifices the apostles made for their faith, showing that all of them were willing to go to the very end for what they believed in. And at the end of this journey of martyrdom, we see how their lives and deaths form a legacy of inspiration and unwavering commitment. Now that you know the incredible stories of the 12 apostles, one question remains. How far are you willing to go for what you believe in? These lives of sacrifice show us that it's not just about talking about faith, but living and acting on it, even in the most difficult situations. What can you change in your own life based on what you've learned here? Perhaps it's time to rethink your priorities, your choices, or even your courage to face daily challenges. What if you, like the apostles, began taking steps toward a greater purpose? Think about it. What small daily actions can you take to transform your life and impact the world around you? The apostles' stories aren't just memories of a distant past. They are invitations for each of us to become living examples of faith and perseverance. If you're ready for this kind of transformation, then don't wait any longer. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep learning about the great stories of the Bible and how they can change your life today. Are you ready for the journey? Let's continue together.